Eliza had stopped counting the days since her younger brother died. Somewhere between winter's chill and spring's promise, time had turned into something blurry. Like fog on the window she stared through each evening. Her brother, Sam, had only been 11. Just a kid, full of questions and games and wild drawings he never showed anyone but her. The accident had taken him quickly. No time for goodbyes. One moment he was riding his bike down the old gravel road near the woods, the next, gone. The silence that followed in their home was louder than any storm. Most nights, Eliza didn't sleep. Her parents had started whispering more, grieving separately. Her mother clung to old photos. Her father spent longer hours in the barn. Eliza, the oldest, just drifted. One night, when the moon was low and the air held that late March chill, she saw something move outside the window. Their backyard stretched to the small family graveyard, where generations rested beneath lichen-covered stones. Sam's grave was there now too. Fresh soil still dark against the older grass. A figure moved in the graveyard. Eliza pressed her forehead to the cold glass. It wasn't a person. It was small and russet, with a bushy tail that swept the ground like a brush. A fox. It stood silently beside Sam's grave, its body still, its ears perked. Eliza blinked. The fox didn't move. It just sat. The wind picked up, rustling through the budding trees, but the fox remained, like a statue carved from the night itself. After what felt like hours, it finally turned and trotted off toward the woods. The next night, Eliza looked again. Same time, same spot. And there it was. The fox. Sitting. Watching. Waiting. By the third night, she was certain it was no coincidence. She didn't tell her parents. They'd think she was imagining things. They barely spoke of Sam anymore. Too painful, maybe. But Eliza couldn't let it go. She started documenting the visits in her notebook. March 22nd, fox came at 9:02 p.m. stayed 10 minutes. No sound. March 23rd, 9:01 p.m. sat again. Windy. Left eastward. March 24th, 9 p.m. earlier? A pattern? Each night, it arrived just as the world slipped into stillness. Always sitting at the foot of the grave. Never sniffing around, never searching. Just sitting. Reverent. Loyal. It felt too real, too purposeful. By the fifth night, she couldn't resist anymore. Wrapped in her brother's old hoodie, Eliza crept out of the back door, careful not to wake her parents. Her boots barely made a sound on the damp grass. The moon above was full and pale, spilling light over the headstones like milk. She stopped behind an old willow tree that stood near the edge of the graveyard. From here, she could see it clearly. The fox. Its coat shimmered in the moonlight. Deep auburn with a splash of white on its chest. Its eyes were alert, not frightened. It seemed to know she was there. Still, it didn't run. Eliza held her breath. Minutes passed. The fox sat in complete stillness, its gaze fixed on the grave. Then, without warning, it turned its head, slowly, deliberately, and looked directly at her. Their eyes met. And in that moment, something strange stirred in Eliza's chest. Not fear. Not surprise. Something else. Something warm. The fox didn't flee. It simply turned, trotted toward the woods, and disappeared into the darkness. The next morning, she found herself sitting at Sam's grave. The ground was damp, but she didn't care. She traced the edge of his name on the stone with her fingers. "Did you know him?" she whispered to the air. "Were you his friend?" There was no answer, of course. Only the distant chirp of morning birds and the slow sway of the willow's branches. That evening, the fox returned. Same time. Same spot. Eliza didn't hide this time. She stood by the porch, watching openly. When the fox arrived, it paused, looked at her again, and then sat. This became their ritual. Every night, Eliza waited. And every night, the fox came. Some in the village whispered about it. That animals sometimes visited graveyards when spirits were restless. That foxes were messengers between worlds. Some even said it was Sam, returned in another form. Eliza didn't believe in that kind of thing. Not really. But she believed in the fox. Weeks passed. Eliza stopped writing in her notebook. The visits had become more than an observation. They had become comfort. Until the night everything changed. It was April now, and the air had softened. Trees bloomed. Sam's grave was no longer bare earth but covered with young grass and the wildflowers Eliza planted. She stood outside, waiting for her nightly visitor. But this time, when the fox arrived, it didn't sit. It stood by the grave for only a few seconds, then turned to face her. Then it stepped forward. One step. Then another. It walked toward her, slowly, its eyes locked on hers. Eliza didn't move. The fox stopped a few feet away. So close now she could see the texture of its fur, the tiny nick on its right ear, the intelligent glint in its amber eyes. Then it turned toward the woods. And waited. Looking back at her. Inviting. Calling. Her heart pounded. Was it just curious? Or was it leading her? She stepped forward. The fox trotted a little farther, then paused again. Another step. Another pause. A trail. And then, without waiting any longer, the fox vanished into the trees. Eliza stood at the edge of the forest, breathing hard, hard in her throat. She looked back at her house. The lights were out. Her parents asleep. And then she looked forward. Into the woods. Toward the fox. Toward whatever truth it wanted her to find. She stepped into the shadows. Eliza stepped into the woods. The branches above laced together like fingers, blotting out most of the moonlight. The air turned cooler, tinged with moss and pine and something older. Like the smell of wet stones and forgotten stories. She hesitated. Ahead, just barely visible, the fox waited. Its bushy tail twitched once. Then it turned and walked deeper into the forest. Not running. Just, leading. Eliza followed, her boots soft against the fallen leaves. Her breath made clouds in the chilled air. Every few steps, the fox paused and looked back to be sure she was still coming. It wasn't afraid of her. It wanted her here. She didn't know how she knew that. But she did. The forest felt alive around her. Not threatening. Just watching. She remembered how Sam used to say that forests had moods. That you could tell what they were thinking if you sat still long enough. He would sit cross-legged under trees, listening like they whispered in a language only he understood. Back then, she'd thought he was just playing. Now, she wasn't so sure. The fox led her over a shallow creek and beneath a fallen log. Moonlight returned in slivers. And then, suddenly it stopped. They stood in a small, overgrown clearing, ringed by thorn bushes and silent trees. And there, nestled in the moss, was something impossible. A tiny shelter. It wasn't a house. More like a hideaway. A rough lean-to made of branches, bark, and canvas. Sam's old blue jacket hung over the opening, weather-faded and worn. Eliza's breath caught. This place, it was familiar. Her brother's drawings. She remembered now. He used to draw this place over and over. Not in full, just fragments. A crooked shelter. A tree with a bent trunk. A symbol of a curled fox. She thought they were just sketches. But this was real. The fox padded up to the little structure and sat beside it, curling its tail around its feet. Eliza stepped closer. The clearing smelled faintly of wood smoke and pine sap. She crouched by the shelter and gently pushed the flap of canvas aside. Inside were treasures. Not valuable things. But his things. Carved wooden animals. Stacks of folded drawings, stained by rain. An old flashlight. A tiny book of poems. A broken compass. All arranged carefully, as if he had just left them and would be back any minute. Eliza's hands trembled as she reached for the drawings. They were simple, childlike, but full of emotion. Her. The fox. The graveyard. The forest. One had a sentence written at the bottom in messy pencil. If I don't come back, tell her. Eliza covered her mouth, holding back a sob. Sam hadn't just played in these woods. He'd lived here, in moments. He'd made memories no one else knew about. Not their parents. Not the neighbors. Not even her. But the fox had known. And somehow, the fox remembered. She sat there in the clearing for what felt like hours. The fox never moved. Just watched. When she finally looked up, its eyes met hers. "You were his friend," she whispered. "Weren't you?" The fox blinked once, slowly. Like an answer. She didn't ask how it understood. She didn't need to. Sam had always talked to animals like they were people. It used to make her laugh. Now it made her cry. The next morning, she didn't tell her parents where she'd been. She kept the clearing a secret. Just like Sam had. But she returned that night. And the next. And every night after that. Sometimes the fox was waiting. Sometimes it arrived after her. They sat in the quiet together, surrounded by Sam's forgotten things, as if keeping vigil over a memory. The villagers noticed she was out more often. Some warned her to stay away from the woods at night. One old woman told her foxes were omens, that they came when spirits lingered too long. But Eliza didn't believe the fox was an omen. It was a messenger. A keeper of her brother's last secret. One evening, she brought one of Sam's favorite toys. A small wooden bird he'd carved. And left it by the shelter. The fox sniffed it, then gently nudged it closer to the drawings. The next day, it was gone. In its place was a feather. Long, golden brown, tucked into the folds of a drawing. A gift. The bond between them was quiet, but deep. Not words, but knowing. Then, one night, it changed again. The fox didn't come. Eliza waited until the stars were high and the wind grew cold. She walked the trail anyway, hoping to find it in the clearing. But it wasn't there. The shelter was untouched, but the air felt different. Hollow, like something missing. The next night, the same. And the next. The fox was gone. Eliza felt it like a second grief. Had it left? Had something happened? She spent hours sitting by the shelter, watching the edge of the trees. But no eyes glowed back at her. 3 nights passed. On the 4th, she found something new. A folded paper tucked into one of the carvings. Her heart nearly stopped. It was one of Sam's letters. But this one she'd never seen. The handwriting was shaky, the paper damp at the edges. But the words were clear. "If you're reading this, it means he brought you here. I hope he did. I was scared I wouldn't get to say goodbye. But I asked him to wait for you. He always waits. I'm sorry for leaving. I didn't want to. But if you're here, it means you still remember me. And that means I'm not gone." "Not really? Take care of him, Eliza. He's more than just a fox. He's the part of me that still walks the world. Love, Sam." Eliza clutched the letter to her chest, tears slipping down her cheeks. She looked up at the woods. Still no sign of the fox. But she waited. She would wait as long as it took. Because some love doesn't fade. It waits. Like the fox in the graveyard. 3 more nights passed. Still no fox. Each evening, Eliza walked the same path into the woods. Her boots pressed into the softened earth, where faint paw prints had once followed her. But now the path was quiet. No paw prints, no movement, no waiting figure with a flame-orange tail. Only the whisper of wind through branches and the ache in her chest. But the letter changed everything. Sam hadn't vanished without a trace. He'd left something behind. Something alive. Something watching. And even if the fox was gone now, Eliza felt its presence, like an ember glowing beneath ash. She knew what she had to do. If the fox wasn't coming back, she would go looking. That morning, she packed a bag, water, a flashlight, the letter, a handful of Sam's drawings, and the wooden bird. The forest stretched deeper than most villagers dared explore, especially alone. But Sam had drawn paths through these woods. Trails no one else noticed. Eliza laid the sketches across her bed and studied them like maps. Bent tree. Creek bend. Thorn ring. She matched the drawings to her memories. And then something new. A tree drawn again and again. Its trunk was scorched on one side, with roots that twisted like reaching fingers. Beneath it, Sam had scrawled one word. Where it began. She'd never seen that tree in the clearing. Which meant it was farther. Deeper. somewhere the fox had been heading, before he disappeared. The forest changed beyond the shelter. The trees grew older, taller, and spaced farther apart. Sunlight filtered through like gold dust. Birdsong was rarer. Even the air smelled different. Less like pine, more like stone and old bark. Eliza walked slowly, holding the drawings like a compass. She crossed the creek again and found the mossy hill where Sam had once carved a spiral into a flat rock. It was still there, half hidden under ivy. Beyond it, the ground rose sharply. Then, at the top, she saw it. The tree. Its trunk was massive, so wide she couldn't wrap her arms around it. The bark on one side was blackened, like it had been struck by lightning. And the roots burst from the earth in every direction, writhing like they were trying to escape. It looked dead. But beneath its shadow, green things still grew. Ferns, wildflowers, mushrooms in rings. And in the center of it all, paw prints. Fresh. Fox. Her breath caught. She dropped to her knees and touched the prints. They weren't fading. They were new. The edges sharp. Damp. He was close. Without thinking, she whispered, "I'm here." Wind stirred the branches. And then rustling. She turned. A flash of red. And there he was. The fox stood at the edge of the glade, watching. Mud clung to his paws. His fur was darker, damp near the legs. Something had happened, but his eyes were the same. Watchful, knowing. "You left," she said, voice cracking. He stepped forward. Not in guilt. Not in fear. But with a purpose. He turned and began walking again. Past the burned tree, deeper into the woods. Eliza followed. The journey grew harder. Roots snagged her feet. The ground became soft and boggy in places. But the fox moved steadily, glancing back only to make sure she kept up. They crossed another stream. This one wider, rushing faster. Eliza's boots soaked through as she waded across. On the other side, she found the first sign. A ribbon. Blue. Frayed. Faded by rain. It hung from a low branch, tied in a careful knot. Sam's favorite color. She untied it gently and slipped it into her bag. The fox waited. Then he turned and continued. By midday, the trees parted. And she saw something that stole her breath. A stone arch, ancient, half buried in vines and moss. Not part of any building. Just, standing there, like a forgotten gate to nowhere. It looked like something from a fairy tale. The fox stopped beneath it. Then he sat, waiting. Eliza stepped through the arch, heart pounding. The air on the other side felt colder. Not threatening. But hushed. Sacred. A narrow trail wound through the ferns beyond the arch, lined by strange stones. Shapes carved by weather or hands long gone. Faces, maybe. Or masks. The fox didn't follow. She turned to him. "Aren't you coming?" But he just blinked. And lay down at the base of the arch, curling his tail around his paws. This was where he stopped. This was her path now. Eliza stepped forward. The trail led into a sun-dappled hollow. And there, nestled among the trees, was a circle of stone pillars. Like the skeleton of a forgotten temple. In the center was a stump, covered in ivy and moss. And on top of it, a box. Wooden. Weather-worn. She approached slowly. The box was sealed by a latch. Rusted, but unbroken. She undid it with trembling fingers. Inside were more letters. More drawings. More of Sam. And at the very bottom, a photograph. Of her and Sam. Younger. Before he vanished. Before the forest took him away. She remembered the day it was taken. A picnic. He had a smudge of jam on his chin. She was missing a front tooth. She didn't even know this photo existed. Tears spilled down her cheeks. This was his sanctuary. The place he came when the world felt too heavy. The fox hadn't just remembered him. It had guarded him. All this time. She sat on the stone, surrounded by her brother's memories. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like something was missing. She felt full. Complete. Like Sam wasn't gone. Just waiting, on the other side of wind and memory. When she returned to the arch, the fox stood again. He walked beside her this time. Not leading. Not following. Together. From that day on, Eliza visited the sanctuary often. Sometimes she brought flowers. Sometimes a carving. Sometimes just silence. And always, the fox came too. He never let her touch him. But he never left. He was part of the forest. Part of her brother. Part of the story she was still learning to tell. And sometimes, when the wind rustled the leaves just right, and the moonlight painted the stones silver, she could almost hear her brother's laughter again. Carried by the fox. Alive in the woods. Still waiting. Still walking. Eliza never told anyone about the sanctuary. Not because she didn't want to share it, but because it felt like a secret meant only for her and Sam. And the fox. She began visiting it regularly, never at the same time or in the same way. Sometimes by day, sometimes at dusk. Always quiet, always listening. Each time, the fox appeared, never running, always waiting. And the arch never aged. The moss stayed green. The stones never fell. The air inside that hollow glowed a little different from the rest of the world. Like the rules of time softened in that circle. But the fourth time she came, the woods felt off. The birds were silent. The wind was still. And the fox, he didn't wait by the arch. She stepped through alone, heart tight. The sanctuary hadn't been touched. Sam's letters still rested where she'd left them, though one had fluttered to the ground. She picked it up, brushing pine needles from the paper. It was written in Sam's careful, uneven scrawl. If someone finds this, tell her I tried. Tell her I followed the whisper, but something watched me from the hollow. Something that wasn't a fox. Don't let it follow you back. Eliza froze. The sanctuary, quiet and sacred, suddenly felt too still. Then she heard it. A sound she had never heard in these woods before. Breathing. Not hers. Not the wind. Something low, labored, and very, very close. She turned. Nothing. Only trees. Stones. Moss. But the air had changed. Colder. Like something behind her eyes had opened. And it didn't belong. She left quickly that day, the fox rejoining her only once she crossed back through the arch. He didn't walk beside her this time. He kept his distance, glancing into the woods behind her as if tracking something she couldn't see. Something following. Eliza didn't sleep well that night. And the next time she tried to visit, the arch was gone. Not broken. Gone. The trail led to the place it had always stood. But now only wild vines, fallen branches, and disturbed earth remained. No moss-covered gate. No silent fox. No way through. She searched the entire day, retracing her steps, calling softly. No sign of him. Only that feeling. The eerie stillness in the woods, that sense of being watched. She remembered Sam's words, something that wasn't a fox. And for the first time, she wondered if she had followed too far. Weeks passed. Life in the village returned to its slow rhythm. Eliza stocked shelves at the florist shop. Cleaned the dust from the church. Walked past the graveyard without stopping. But she felt the change inside her. As though the forest had marked her. Even in dreams, the trees whispered now. And always the eyes. Yellow. Hollow. Watching from behind a veil of leaves. It was late one evening when she heard the knock. Not at the front door. At her window. She froze. The knock came again. 3 soft taps. She rose slowly, heart in her throat. Outside, barely visible in the dusk light. The fox. But not like before. His fur was ragged. Clumps missing. His chest heaved with every breath, and his eyes, once warm and deep, were wild. She rushed to the door, but by the time she stepped outside, he was gone. Only paw prints remained. Leading not toward the woods, but toward the graveyard. Eliza hesitated. Her last visit to the forest had filled her with dread. But this was different. This wasn't the forest calling her back. It was something older. Closer. She grabbed her coat, a lantern, and a bundle of Sam's letters, just in case. And followed the fox's tracks through the gate of the old churchyard. The moon lit the path in silver. Gravestones leaned at strange angles, some sunk into the ground, others broken in half. Weeds swayed in the breeze. The iron fence creaked softly. And then she saw him. The fox. Perched atop a grave. One she didn't recognize. She stepped closer. The name carved into the stone was faint but still legible. Thaddeus Graywell. The Watcher of Hollow Places. 1812 1865 The fox growled softly. Not at her, but at the stone. Then turned his head toward the trees beyond the graveyard. And Eliza saw it. A shadow. Not a person. Not an animal. Something between. Its limbs were long, but bent wrong. Its head tilted as if broken at the neck. And its eyes. Those eyes were yellow and empty, glowing without light. She stumbled back. The fox barked a fierce, sharp sound. And the creature stopped. But only for a moment. Then it vanished, dissolving into the mist that crept between tombstones. Eliza turned to run. But the fox blocked her path. He looked at her, then at the grave again. She understood. This wasn't the first time the thing had come. And the grave was a warning. The watcher of hollow places. It had followed Sam. And now her. But the fox, he had been guarding her from it all along. Just as he had tried to guard Sam. Just as he had brought her back when the arch disappeared. The fox wasn't just a guide. He was a shield. And now he was preparing for a final stand. That night, Eliza didn't sleep. She read through Sam's letters again and again, searching for clues. One phrase appeared more than once. The watcher waits in hollows where grief lingers the longest. The graveyard. The sanctuary. Even the woods. Places where love had left scars. That's where it fed. Where it found ways through. And now, it had found her. In the morning, she returned to the grave with candles, salt, a ring of iron nails. Anything folklore said could keep such things at bay. The fox met her again. And together, they stood guard. Not just over graves. But over the line between mourning and madness. Between memory and the monsters it left behind. That was the beginning of something new. Not peace. But purpose. She wasn't just visiting Sam's memory anymore. She was protecting it. Holding back the hollow places. With a fox who had never truly left. _777777777777777. Eliza thought she knew fear. She had known it when Sam first went missing. When the arch disappeared. When she first saw the yellow eyes in the mist. But none of it compared to the dread that settled in her chest now. Because fear is different when it waits. When it sits in your room, quiet and still, watching from a dark corner. Not attacking, not speaking, only waiting. Waiting for you to break. And in the nights that followed her return to Thaddeus Graywell's grave, that fear returned. Not as dreams. Not as shadows. But as noises. Scratching from beneath the floorboards. Muffled knocks in the walls. Whispers that stopped the moment she turned her head. And always, the fox outside her window. Silent. Unmoving. Guarding. Eliza stopped going to work. She stopped calling her friends. She stopped pretending things were normal. She read everything she could find on Graywell. The local library had only one record of him. A passing mention in a book on village superstitions. Thaddeus Graywell, said to be a warlock or watcher, buried at St. Cressida's graveyard in 1865. Believers claimed he sealed an evil spirit beneath the church hill, trapping it with iron nails and sacred ash. The site was later overgrown. The hollow was forgotten. But Eliza remembered. She remembered the soft slope beyond the grave. Where the moss never grew right. Where the trees bent away from the earth instead of toward the sun. She remembered what Sam had written. The watcher waits in hollows where grief lingers. That slope was the mouth of something ancient. And it was waking up. She made her way there at dusk, the fox by her side. She carried a shovel, lantern, and the ring of iron she'd worn since her first night of haunting. The slope loomed before her, silent and cold. Each step down felt like pressing into a bruise. The soil was too soft, too damp, as if it had been disturbed from below. She began to dig. The fox circled nervously, ears flat, tail stiff. Then she hit something. Not a rock. Not a coffin. Wood. Rotten and splintering. She cleared the earth with her hands, heart pounding. It wasn't a grave. It was a door. The planks were nailed shut with old iron spikes, blackened and twisted with rust. Symbols were carved around the seams. Circles within circles, overlapping triangles, and a single eye repeated over and over. A warning. Not to her. To whatever was inside. She reached for the iron spike, then hesitated. Was she truly about to open this? What if Graywell had buried it here? Not just to seal it away, but to protect everyone else? But Sam had followed this path. And if Eliza had learned anything about Sam, it was that he didn't turn away from what scared him. She pulled the spike loose. It made no sound. No rush of wind. No burst of cold. Just the creaking of ancient wood and the dry crumble of dirt. The door opened downward, revealing a narrow tunnel beneath the graveyard. Too straight for nature. Too old for man. And from within came the scent of ash, salt, and something sweet. Like roses left too long in a closed box. She entered. The fox stayed above. But didn't leave. Just waited at the mouth of the tunnel, eyes alert, tail flicking with tension. The tunnel sloped steeply, curving slightly to the left. The walls were lined with stone, scratched and scraped as if clawed from the inside out. And at the end, she found bones. Dozens of them. Not human. Not animal. Both. Twisted, fused, scattered like the remains of dreams and nightmares that had tried to crawl free. And among them, at the center of the chamber, sat a chair. Carved from black wood. Bound in iron. And occupied. The figure in the chair was tall. Too tall. Its limbs were impossibly long, wrapped in what looked like funeral cloth, layered and brittle with age. Its head was down. Hands resting on the armrests. Fingers like roots. Still. As if asleep. But the moment Eliza stepped into the chamber, it lifted its head. And she saw. Its face wasn't a face. It was a mirror. A cracked, shifting pane of darkness that reflected only her. Her pain. Her regret. Her memory. And it smiled. Without lips. Without a sound. But she felt it. In her bones. In her blood. You called, it said. You followed his grief into mine. Eliza didn't scream. She didn't run. She stood her ground. Because now she understood. This was no ghost. No demon. This was what grief became when it was never released. This was every sorrow left to rot. Every memory locked away and buried. This was what waited beneath. And she was done being afraid. You don't belong here, she said. You don't get to wear his voice. You don't get to live in his hollow. The figure tilted its head. I don't live in him. I am him. The part that stayed behind. The ache that never left. I am what you wouldn't let go. And Eliza understood. The longer she held on to Sam's pain, the longer she visited the sanctuary without moving forward, the more power this thing had. It wasn't hunting her. It was feeding. She reached into her coat and pulled out Sam's last letter. The one she had never opened. The one she couldn't bring herself to read. Now she unfolded it with shaking fingers and read aloud. Eliza, if you're reading this, it means you've followed me too far. And I'm sorry. I should have stayed. Should have turned back. But the silence was too familiar. The ache too comfortable. I didn't want to be found. I wanted someone to miss me so much that I'd never really be gone. But if you're here, it means I was wrong. It means it's time to let me go. Love, Sam. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she read. But with each word, the thing in the chair shrank. Its limbs curled inward. The mirror face cracked further. And then, with a final trembling breath, it collapsed into dust. The tunnel grew brighter. Not with sunlight. But with peace. With the warmth of something released. She looked down at the bones. They, too, were gone. Only the chair remained empty now. The hollow wasn't cursed. It had been waiting. Not for revenge. For remembrance. She returned to the surface, legs weak, eyes swollen. The fox met her at the mouth of the tunnel. For the first time, he came close enough to touch. She knelt and placed her hand on his back. He didn't flinch. Didn't growl. Just leaned in. And together, they watched the mist rise from the graveyard and fade into the sky. That night, Eliza slept. Not dreamlessly, but softly. The fox lay curled at her door. And for the first time in months, the house was silent. The days grew quieter. Eliza began waking before the alarm again. The kettle sang without sounding like a whisper from the dead. And the light in the hallway no longer flickered when she passed. The graveyard didn't call to her anymore. It simply waited, like old stone does, content to rest in the memory of things buried and left behind. And yet, the fox remained, not as a shadow, not as a sentinel, but as something else. A companion. He followed her to the store, sat under the bench at the bus stop, slept in the tall grass outside her fence. And Eliza began to wonder, was he still watching? Or was he waiting? For her? Autumn settled in. The wind lost its warmth, and the trees dropped their final gold. Eliza returned to her garden, where weeds had overtaken the edges. She didn't mind. There was something comforting about starting over. Each time she pressed her hands into the soil, she thought of Sam. Not the grief. Not the letters. Just him. The way he tilted his head when curious. The way he laughed without covering his mouth. The way he always knew when silence was better than words. One morning, she woke to find the fox sitting at her back door. But something was different. He wasn't watching her. He was watching the horizon. The graveyard. And his fur shimmered. Not from mist, but from light. Soft. Pale. Like the glow of a lantern. When Eliza stepped outside, he didn't run. He turned and trotted toward the churchyard. She followed. No coat. No bag. No fear. Only a quiet pull in her chest, as if something long buried was finally calling home. The path to the graveyard was overgrown, but not hostile. The briars bowed away. The branches parted gently. The fox led her past Graywell's grave, past the hollow, and into the woods beyond. Deeper than she had ever gone. She heard no birds. No wind. Just the sound of paws on soft earth, and her own breath echoing back through trees that remembered everything. At the center of the forest, where the roots formed a perfect circle, the fox stopped. And Eliza saw it. A lantern, hanging from a crooked branch. No flame, but glowing, soft, blue, familiar. Inside it, a flicker of movement. A silhouette. She stepped closer. And there within the lantern's light, stood Sam. Not as a ghost. Not as a memory. As a figure of warmth, woven from the same gentle glow that lit the lantern itself. He didn't speak. Didn't smile. He simply looked at her the way he used to. The way he always had. Like she was a secret worth keeping. She raised her hand to the lantern. It pulsed with warmth. Not heat. A hum, like a lullaby half forgotten. She whispered, "I'm sorry I held on too long." The lantern pulsed again. And Sam's figure closed his eyes. Not in pain. In peace. Then, slowly, gently, he stepped backward, into the light. And faded. The glow rose upward. Dispersed into the leaves. And the lantern, now empty, swung gently in the breeze that hadn't been there before. The fox sat beside her, tail wrapped around its paws. He didn't look sad. He looked ready. And in that moment, Eliza understood. He wasn't just a fox. He was a guide, a memory given shape. A creature born of waiting and watching. But his task was done. Eliza knelt and whispered, "Thank you." The fox pressed his head to her palm. Then turned. And walked back into the trees. Without looking back. In the weeks that followed, the whispers stopped. The weight lifted. And Eliza began to smile again. Not every day, but more and more often. She wrote letters she didn't need to send. She planted seeds without needing them to grow. And each time she passed the churchyard, she nodded. Not to a ghost. To a memory. A friend. A boy who had wandered too deep. And a girl who had followed him. Not to bring him back, but to let him go. One evening, just before winter set in, Eliza lit a lantern of her own. She hung it in her garden, among the ivy and fading roses. Not as a beacon, not as a warning, as a promise, that even in the places where grief lingers, there can still be light. There can still be peace. There can still be love. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey through this wonderful tale. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up, share it with someone who loves mystical tales. And don't forget to subscribe to The Real Furry Stories for more unforgettable stories of love, loss, and the bonds that never die. Until next time, may your lanterns always stay lit. Hearty goodbye.